And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome aboard. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service, and this is your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook to take us at the end of this week into the early weekend. And first off, the sea ice, well, it's been rather active and windy here across the west side of the state. We've had low pressure, lower Chukchi Sea, north bearing now, single low located just west of Nome as of this Thursday afternoon, and a strong mid and upper level low that's going to continue to slide southward along the west and southwest coast here as we go into the weekend. But with colder air in place up here, we do expect there to be more in the way of ice growth coming up once the winds settle down a bit here, especially across areas of the Chukchi Sea and along the western coastline. Looking at the weather map, late tonight, early Friday morning, we have the one low that will continue to drift southward into the lower Yukon Delta. Secondary low spins up along the Kenai coast this evening and then up toward western Prince William Sound early Friday morning. That's going to bring a round of moderate snowfall across portions of the Kenai Peninsula, Anchorage, Bowl, Turnagain Arm as we go through late this Thursday night and during the day Friday. And then later in the day Friday, we expect that low just kind of weaken and wash out with the low over the Yukon Delta sinking further southward. And then here's the next notable weather system. A storm force low will develop and take aim toward the Panhandle here for late Friday night into Saturday. And as that front and the low pushes its way on up toward the Panhandle, we have a high wind watch for areas of the southern Panhandle. Southeast winds ahead of the system could gust as high as 50, 60 miles an hour. And there will be some moderate to heavy rainfall pushing up into the southern Panhandle with areas of snow, accumulating snow further north, so stay tuned to later watches, warnings, and advisories. Another low will be lifting out of the North Pacific and then riding up on the south side of the Alaska Peninsula for later this weekend, early next week, and that's going to be the next weather maker to impact areas along the Gulf Coast. So looking at the winds Friday night, or Friday afternoon during the day, we expect southeast winds 25-30 knots, gust as high as 40 knots. They're within the middle channels around Stevens Passage. 45-knot gusts possible there. Lynn Canal waves could be running as high as 5-6 feet. And then for the outer coast, south to southwest winds around 25 knots south of Gustavus with waves 9 feet. Look for westerly southwest winds 20 to 25 knots outside of Yakutat Bay with 9 to 10 foot waves. And for Saturday, as that strong low approaches from the southwest, we expect southeast gales, 45 knots, gust to 50 knots here. Dixon entrance, waves building as high as 17 feet in the south end of the Panhandle. Look for northeast winds, 20 knots, gust to 50 knots through Stevens Passage, and then north winds to 25 knots with 5-foot waves, Lynn Canal, and then areas off the Gulf Coast, southeast winds to 45 knots there off of Craig, turning east-northeast 25-35 knots, gust of 40 knots there vicinity of Sitka. Waves as high as 15 to nearly 20 feet there within the nearshore waters just off of the southwestern portion of the Panhandle. Now on Friday, the western Gulf, we have an area of low pressure that will continue to lift northeastward and weaken west end here of Prince William Sound, and then in the wake of it, winds are going to be more west to southwest, 15 to 20 knots, lower Cook Inlet waves 4 or 5 feet. Off the Kenai coast, waves could be as high as 9 feet and as high as 13 feet outside of Hinchinbrook entrance. And for Saturday, winds will come down a bit, at least out over the northwestern areas of the Gulf. Northeast winds 15 knots within Prince William Sound, 3-foot waves. Look for north to northwest winds 15 to 20 knots along the length of Cook Inlet, 3 to as high as 5-foot waves off of Anchor Point and at the entrance of Cook Inlet. Across the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, winds will generally be out of the west-southwest, 20-25 knots, waves 3 to 5 feet on the North Pacific side and 8 to 9 feet on the Bering side, especially once you get from Bristol Bay on out toward north of Cold Bay. And then winds Saturday will be out of the west-southwest around Kodiak Island down through the middle portion of the peninsula at 20 knots and turning more west-northwesterly, 30 to as high as 35 knots north of Cold Bay with waves there on the Bering side as high as 7-8 feet. The eastern Aleutians will see northwesterly winds 15 to 20 knots become variable 10 knots there just west of Nikolsky, and then turning back toward the northeast, and eventually easterly gales up to 40 knots west of Kiska, because there's another area of low pressure out that way. And for Saturday then, across the areas, this low passes south of the central and eastern Aleutians, winds turn more northerly, and we expect widespread 35 to 40 knot gales out of the north-northwest, waves as high as 11 to 17 feet here on the North Pacific side, and 13 to 17 feet on the Bering side. Along the southwest coast, we expect winds to be out of the west, northwest, 20 to 25 knots, Bristol Bay, Kuskokwim Bay towards St. Paul, but upwards of 30 knots from the northwest, Hooper Bay westward towards St. Paul, though there will be ice in place here along the immediate coastline. Northeast winds 15-20 knots out of Norton Sound, and then for Saturday, northeast winds continue out of Norton Sound and along the lower areas of the Yukon Delta at 15 knots, turning more northerly, increasing to 30 knots, St. Matthew down through St. Paul with waves 11 to 13 feet, and north to northwest winds 20 to 25 knots. Offshore flow generally out of Kuskokwim and Bristol Bays. Now for Friday, we do expect some stronger winds, especially on the north side of St. Lawrence Island around Gamble. There are going to be stronger winds coming along the Russian coastline, 40-knot gales, waves as high as 13 feet. Look for northeasterly winds to 30 knots, lower Chukchi, a mix of ice and some open water waves. Could be as high as 6-8 feet where there is open water. And then along areas of the Beaufort Sea coastline, winds out of the east to north at 10 knots, and as I said, the ice there in place. Saturday, the winds will come down across the Arctic coast, generally 5 to 15 knots out of the northwest. We'll still have winds, though, through the Bering Strait on Saturday, around 30 knots out of the north. And then the north side of St. Lawrence Island could see winds of 30 to 35 knots out of the north, waves 6 to 8 feet through the Bering Strait, and as much as 12 feet there on the west side of St. Lawrence Island in the vicinity of Gamble.